Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of the Graduate School of Oceanography GSO Ocean Classroom Live. My name is Holly Morin, and I am a marine biologist and science communicator with the Interspace Center at URI GSO, which is in Narragansett, Rhode Island, which of course is not where I am right now. I'm coming to you live from my own house in North Kingstown, Rhode Island, and I am going to be your host again today for this episode. Just like our previous episodes of Ocean Classroom Live, today's program, we're going to be connecting you all out there with an ocean scientist or an engineer. We're going to be getting a little career awareness, and then we're going to be sharing some interesting knowledge and answer as many of your questions that you might have in real time. So remember, you can ask questions at any time during this live event. You can do that either entering them straight into the chat feature there in Facebook or also in the chat box in YouTube if you're watching through that platform as well. And we're going to try to get to as many of your questions today as possible. So during our other 2 episodes, we kind of spanned the poles, right? We were talking about Antarctic and Arctic research. But today we're bringing things back home, at least for those of us that are here in Rhode Island or southeastern New England. And we're going to talk about Narragansett Bay. And beyond that, we're also going to we're going to explore the longest fisheries survey, from what I understand, to exist or to be known in the world. This is the URI GSO fish trawl survey. This survey has been happening for more than 60 years, and it samples the bottom fish and invertebrate community in Narragansett Bay, as well as other species, takes some water measurements as well. And that data can then be used to investigate and understand potential changes in the bay, and then how these relate to other global trends. But before we dive into that, and I introduce our guest today, I'd actually like to show you my connection to these efforts. I am not a fishery trawl assistant. However, the boat that's used, the vessel that's used for these surveys, is called the Captain Bird. And it is used for outreach and education, as well as the collection of important fisheries data. So I've actually taken my campers. The Interspace Center hosts several camps during the summer and other educational programs, and we've gone out on the Captain Bird. You can see it here. And students will actually get exposed to the same type of fisheries survey protocol and catch that we'll be talking about in just a little bit. And it's great for those kids to then get exposed to different species, how a trawl works, and the diversity of animals that come up in the catch as well. They're always super excited. So even though I'm not a trawl assistant, I'm super excited to get out on the water and be on the bird, just like this, as you see here. This is actually a huge flounder. The student that was there was kind of a little apprehensive about touching it, but he did hold it after a while, which was great for me and for him. It's just a really great experience to learn about and see these animals in the wild. So before we talk more about the fish trawl, how it works, all the different data, I want to introduce you to 2 of the GSO students that are or have been trawl assistants or survey assistants. So Nina Santos and Joe Langan. Nina, why don't you say hello to everybody and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Nina, and I kind of got interested in oceanography, and I'm a master's student at GSO now, and I kind of got started and interested in oceanography in the first place because I'm originally from New Bedford, Massachusetts, where my father was a scallop fisherman, and many of my uncles were also scallop fishermen. And so I'm interested in learning about sort of the ecosystem that supports fisheries that supported families like mine, and kind of how climate change is potentially changing the ecosystems that support those fisheries.
Great, thank you. And Joe, do you want to say hello to everybody?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Joe. I'm a PhD candidate in biological oceanography and a master's student in statistics at GSO. And I am super interested in how climate and fishing collide to kind of impact our marine ecosystems. So I grew up in upstate New York and was super fortunate to have a dad who wanted to take me fishing anywhere and everywhere, every chance we could get. We grew up fishing for trout in the mountains or chasing striped bass and bluefish along our coasts. And as I grew up, I became very, very kind of enthralled with changing fish populations and how temperature storms might impact those. So I ended up going to the University of New England for my undergrad, where I did bachelor's degrees in marine science and mathematics as well. I became super interested in kind of the mathy side of fisheries science. And now at GSO, I'm kind of pursuing both degrees where I do a lot of work trying to use statistical tools to better understand how climate change, ocean circulation, and fishing are all kind of combining to impact marine ecosystems, and how learning about that can help us work toward a more sustainable future for marine fisheries.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. I don't know which is more fantastic, the fact that you're getting a degree in statistics or that awesome picture they put up of you as a little kid holding a fish. I think both are equally pretty great. We want this to be a conversation again. So asking questions, hopefully you guys are all going to learn something about the fish trawl in Narragansett Bay as well. So please remember, you can type in question comments at any time, whether it's about Narragansett Bay, the fish trawl, the different fish that maybe Nina and Joe see, anything, life on a ship, what it's like when they're out at sea, technology, basically any type of oceanography question or any science question at all you might have, definitely feel free to let us know, and those will actually get sent to us, and we will try to answer as many as we can. So before we dive into things about the fish survey, I thought it would actually be really useful to give a quick overview of the Narragansett Bay ecosystem, just to kind of ground us all as to what we're talking about in the area. So Narragansett Bay is actually one of New England's largest estuaries. And when we say estuary, that means it's going to be a mix of salt water and fresh water. So we're talking about 196 square miles of these estuarine waters, and that's, you know, bordering Rhode Island as well as Massachusetts. There's more than 30 islands that are in the bay. Maybe you guys have heard of Prudence Island, Aquidneck Island, and then there are actually rivers, many rivers, including the Seconic, Mount Hope Bay, etc., Taunton River, even from Massachusetts, that are also kind of flowing into the bay system. So over 3,500 miles of streams and river that are carrying water into the bay. And then you also have Rhode Island Sound and the Atlantic Ocean there as well, and Block Island, which many of us know as well, is about 20 miles to the southwest of Narragansett Bay's opening. So Joe, this system is really unique, correct? And even though this is our backyard, it's our living laboratory, there's still a lot to know about it and how it's changing. Could you let us know a little bit more about Narragansett Bay and its oceanography, its boundaries, what makes it really special?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a question that it takes a little bit of digging to kind of better understand. Like you said, we all live here in Little Rhodey and think of Narragansett Bay kind of as our backyard, but we're actually in a super interesting position along the east coast of the United States. So just to our north of Cape Cod, is the Gulf of Maine. This is kind of a deep, cold water body that supports a colder water ecosystem. Just to our south of Long Island, is the Mid-Atlantic Bight, which is a lot more shallow, a lot warmer, influenced by the Gulf Stream. And so whether you look at this by temperature or by what critters we see, Narragansett Bay is right on the dividing line between those two ecosystems. And so historically, we've always seen a mix of both, and it makes our ecosystem particularly sensitive to change, where if you imagine us on that balancing point, if you warm things up, for example, from climate change or shifts in ocean circulation, it can kind of tip things very quickly. And as you mentioned as well, of course, it is an estuary, meaning that what happens upstream, all of those river miles, that Narragansett Bay is the largest estuary in New England, does come down also to influence the bay ecosystem. So it's really this very interesting kind of nexus of human development and influence upstream, and then large-scale oceanography at the mouth of the ocean.
Awesome. Yeah. And it's important to remember that the bay is always changing. It's not the same that it was 100 years ago or even maybe 10 years ago. And that's why the work that you all are doing with the fish trawl is so important, to get that long-term measurement, to maybe see trends and changes, and understand the bay's changing ecology over time. And maybe it's doing so is changing in unknown, unpredictable ways. So Nina, you are the current fish trawl assistant. What is a day in the life of a GSO fish trawl assistant? Why don't you walk us through things, what's involved, what types of tools you use, etc.?
Yeah, so every time, so we go out every week, and every time we go out, we sample a location that's further up the bay, and then we sample another location that's further to the mouth of the bay, closer to the Rhode Island Sound. And at each station, we are using a tool called the YSI that is recording sort of environmental information about the water column that we're going to be towing in. So we collect data about the temperature and salinity and things, and dissolved oxygen and things like that. And then we're towing at each of those spots for 30 minutes. And then we're pulling up all of the critters that are caught in net, and we're counting them and weighing them by species, and also getting some measurements of the length.
Awesome. Thanks, Nina. Reminder to everybody out there, if you have questions while we're chatting, definitely ask those or think of those, any question that you might have. Nina, really quick, you mentioned a net. This is obviously not like, we're not out there rod and reel. We're not using a usual scoop net. What type of net are you all deploying during the survey?
So this is called an otter trawl or bottom trawl net. So I think you can see in some of the video, there's some what we call doors that go down to the bottom, and they hold that net open so that, and there's also floats at the top, and there's a chain at the bottom, so that we have like a nice opening for the net for all of the critters to get right into right at the bottom.
Perfect. Yeah. And then, so you mentioned that you're going out weekly. Joe, is this the norm for most surveys? Now, you were a past fisheries survey assistant. So where you're going out weekly, are you going out multiple times during the week? And then again, is this type of schedule where you have this week after week after week of data? Is that how most fisheries surveys work?
No, absolutely not. So I am not aware of another survey actually globally that goes every week year round. It's very, very abnormal. So we go once a week and sample those 2 stations, usually on the same day, unless weather's rough and we can only get 1 done and then have to come back later. But the reason being that obviously it's expensive. It takes a lot of time to run a boat to go out once a week. And then also for fisheries management reasons, usually we want spatial data. And the reason is that you can imagine if you were trying to survey all the fish in a pond, if you tried to catch fish all over the pond, you're surveying the entire area those fish can be, and you can get a good estimate of how many fish there are for fisheries management. If you're just sampling the same location over and over, you can't get that abundance estimate you need to manage the fishery. And so with limited resources, most places are using more kind of once or twice a year surveys, or at a maximum monthly surveys that cover more spatial area, where our survey is very unique in that we sample 2 locations, but do so at much, much higher frequency.
Yeah, and then so that makes this type of survey and the research or the data that's being collected really unique and really important, I would say. And then, but of course, as we all know, with the current COVID-19 situation, most or actually all oceanographic vessels are pretty much grounded until July 1, give or take. So what has happened then to the fish trawl? Are you guys still going out on a weekly basis?
Yeah, so we haven't actually gone out since mid-March, and we're trying to figure out a way to continue our sampling in a way that will keep everyone safe, but that's still sort of in the works. But yeah, we haven't been sampling.
And has there been a data gap like this previously then? Have you had it where you haven't been able to go out every single week?
Previously, in the spring of 2017, there was a small gap when we were kind of switching over captains, and there was some boat work happening. But this is, I think, one of the longest, or the longest time that we've not been able to sample.
And then, so will that then, Joe, you actually have a really unique assistant. Now you've got a unique assistant, unique perspective. I'm getting all my words mixed up today. It must be a Thursday. So you have a unique perspective that you've been a fish trawl assistant, but I think it's fantastic that you're also using the data. So what is the data that's being collected and how are you using it? And then is this type of gap that's occurring right now, is that going to have an impact on the data, do you think?
Yeah, so as Nina said, we have this weekly data. And so you can imagine just like the changing of the seasons, in your yard with trees changing, flowers blooming. We have that seasonal cycle in Narragansett Bay of different fish coming in and out. A lot of our species migrate somewhere else for at least part of the year. And so you can imagine we have this kind of long-term time series of this seasonal cycle. And what makes our survey so interesting, and some of the work I've been really interested in, is because we have this weekly time resolution, we're able to actually measure change in those fish migrations in a marine system, which is literally like impossible almost everywhere else in the world. And we're seeing these changes occur on the range of months, where say things like summer flounder or squid are arriving in the bay a month earlier and leaving the bay a month or more later each year. And so these are really, really interesting scientific questions we're able to address with this unique data set. But as you mentioned, when we have holes then, we don't have that information. So as a stats guy, we can use some fancy math to make our best guess at what we would have caught had we gone based on kind of recent years and what we catch the rest of the year. But we never get that data back. At the best, we can kind of put in a guess that will not bias kind of annual summaries of the data too much, but it's not real data. We're just kind of, the best we can do is impute a best guess.
All right, great. Thanks, Joe. Looks like we actually have a question that's come in, and this is going to be from Regan and Marin. Thank you for your question. They want to know, you were just talking about all the different fish and they're migrating. What is your favorite animal in the bay? So Nina, why don't you go first? Do you have a favorite animal where you're, from New Bedford, maybe? What is your favorite animal in the bay?
I think the animal that I'm always most excited to see is horseshoe crabs, just because I think they're really cool and prehistoric looking. But some of my favorite things that I've caught ever were one time I caught a little seahorse, which was really cool for me, and also
that seahorse.
Yeah. And then also one time I caught a sand tiger shark, I think it's called. So those are probably my two favorite things we've ever caught in the survey.
Yeah. So are seahorse something that are common that you actually bring up in the survey?
No, I think that was one of the first ones we'd ever seen in the time series. But that I looked it up once I found it, and it seems like that type of seahorse is found like all the way from like Florida to Canada. So they're not like a crazy species to catch here, I guess.
Super interesting. And then with horseshoe crabs, it's always interesting. Right around now, I think in May is when we start to see them along the coastal waters. So maybe all of you that are tuning in right now could go out to your beaches when you have a chance. If you can make it out to the beach, to the coast, and you can actually maybe check out some of those horseshoe crabs that Nina is so fond of. Joe, what about you? You've actually got a lot of different fish species, it seems like you've caught in the past, based on your stories that you were telling. What's your favorite animal in the bay?
I thought Nina was going to steal it, so now I will use it. I'm going to say Atlantic cod. This is Nina's research focus, or one of her foci, so I'll let her talk more about it. But New England just has such a rich history with Atlantic cod, and this is kind of the southern limit of their global distribution. So we're kind of right at the very southern edge of where you can ever catch cod. And I worked on cod too during my undergrad, so I kind of have a soft spot for them.
Fantastic. And I will openly admit that they're not bad to actually eat as well. So when we're talking about fish, what are the most common fish that are found actually in the bay? While we're kind of on this, cod is one of them, but are there other species that are more common that you usually see?
Yes, actually cod are not that common in the bay, but we do catch a few of them. But I would say, especially in the summer months, we catch a lot of scup and things like that. But
any other vertebrates maybe that you guys catch maybe in the summer, or is it more that maybe the species that are coming through are migratory? This is me not necessarily knowing the ecosystem or the fisheries in the area.
So it's complicated. As we've been able to observe 60 years of change in the bay, a lot has changed. So if you imagine back when the survey started in the 60s, due to basically more transport of cold water coming down the coast from the north from Canada, the bay and the Rhode Island Sound and this area of New England was a lot colder. And so back then we had a lot more cold water resident fish. We caught more cod. We had a ton of winter flounder. They used to be our most dominant species in the bay. We had monkfish. We had more hake, things like that. And now as things have kind of warmed up over time, we're now getting more Gulf Stream influence into our ecosystem. That has shifted into more of these seasonal migrant species, and particularly those that only spend the summer here. So things like scup are now our most abundant species, or summer flounder, or for an invertebrate, we now have a ton more squid than we used to. So things like that, and that's kind of the overall pattern has shifted towards some of these summer visitors rather than year-round residents.
Great, thanks, Joe. Where you just mentioned invertebrates, we actually have another question from Vivian. She wants to know if you all ever bring up any crabs in the trawl. So Nina, do you bring up any? I know there are a variety of different species of crabs that we find here in the bay. Do you ever bring up any in the otter trawl?
Yeah, so we bring up blue crab, some rock crab and Jonah crab, and even some hermit crabs. So lots of crabs.
So that is
spider crabs.
Spider crab, yeah. Excellent. And then Kathy Couchon also has a question about looking at the catch that you guys bring on board the Captain Bert during the survey. Kathy Couchon would like to know, what are some of the smaller critters that you all collect that get caught in the net? So Joe, what are some of the, do you know what some of the smallest critters are that might be collected?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing to know is the mesh on our net is, as a fisherman would say, it's 1-inch stretch, which means the mesh is a diamond pattern, and if you pull that diamond kind of out so that the sides come together, it's 1 inch at the cod end and it's 2 inches at the mouth of the net. So that limits how small of stuff we can catch, unless it gets like stuck to a flounder or something. But I would say some of the smallest stuff we'll catch very, very young juvenile, even like borderline larval fish occasionally, as well as some really small inverts. We'll catch like some small polychaete worms or small mud crabs or things like that. But we are limited by kind of our mesh size. You would need a smaller mesh to catch a lot of the smaller stuff.
Great, thanks. And then Nina, you had mentioned blue crabs as one of the crab species that you might see in your catch. Jason Krumholtz, he has a question for us, and he would like to know if you are seeing more blue crabs in the bay.
That's a good question. I'm not sure if we've seen an increase in blue crabs in the bay.
Joe,
we saw an explosion in like 2010, 2011 or so. We definitely are catching more now than, say, like the 1960s. And I know when they kind of blew up in the late aughts there, people were like, oh, here we go. We get to be Delaware Bay now. But they haven't been increasing still, at least not that much in the last few years, as far as I know.
And then while we're talking about things that you guys catch in the net, and these are all biological things, all critters, do you ever see anything or catch any marine debris? So marine debris is another big topic that a lot of people are concerned about. Do you guys ever see any trash while you're out offshore or out in the survey? Have you brought any of those items ever in in your catch before?
Yeah, I would say that in almost every tow, we're actually getting some sort of piece of plastic, or sometimes like a can or a bottle, or I think one time there was even a hat that someone caught in the net. So there is marine debris that gets caught in the trawl pretty often.
Yeah, I had done a trawl somewhere else before, and they pulled in a huge tire in their net. Actually, the net had gotten stuck, but inside the tire was this giant horseshoe crab. So it's a catch-22 that the tire was there, but it was providing habitat to another animal. So are there any other invasive species have you ever come across in the catch as well? I know that there are a lot of, it sounds like fish or other animals that might be coming through based on the two different bodies of water that kind of bookend things. But have you ever found species out of place or invasive species?
Yeah, so I think Joe mentioned this or touched on it. There are some like warm water species that we're seeing more of in Narragansett Bay now, specifically, for example, things like, I think we're seeing an increase in things like sea robins, and like I do, my research for my master's is kind of comparing the overlap in diet between Atlantic cod, which is an iconic sort of southern Rhode Island and southern New England species, and black sea bass, which is a warm water sort of invader that was always kind of sparsely distributed here in southern New England, but has really, we've seen an increase in their abundance recently.
Great, thanks, Nina. So one other thing to make note of is the history of the survey. So it was founded by two marine biologists. I love that their names were Charles and Marie Fish. I always love that. And they are actually the folks that found the Narragansett Marine Laboratory 72 somewhat years ago. And that, of course, went on to become the University of Rhode Island's Graduate School of Oceanography. And then they were the ones that founded the survey back in 1959. And so this is part of their legacy, this survey. So for both of you, Joe and Nina, Nina, you're the current trawl assistant, and Joe, where you were previously. What does it mean to you all to be part of something like this that's so historical, that's providing this really valuable data to GSO, but to also other groups that are interested in this type of fisheries data? What does it mean to you, and maybe what's your favorite part of the job and experience?
Yeah, I think it's really cool to be a part of something that's been going on for so long, and I think that it has a lot of like name recognition. So when you say that you're like the DRI GSO fish trawl assistant, a lot of people like know of that, or a lot of people in Rhode Island know of someone who was the fish trawl assistant and things like that. And I just think it's cool to be a part of that. And personally, I think it's great to get a chance to be out on the water every week and collect some cool data. So
awesome. Joe, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd echo that. I mean, because I spend so much time kind of digging through the data for various research projects, it's kind of like a time machine. You get to go back in time to when Rhode Island looked different, when the climate was different, and think about how our ecosystem functioned then and what's changed. And what I really like too is also that human piece of when I have the opportunity to go to conferences or participate in fisheries management meetings, I'll meet people who say, oh yeah, I was the trawl assistant in the 70s. Or another example is one of our faculty at GSO, Candace Oviatt, was the original graduate fish trawl assistant back in the 60s, and she's still teaching at GSO. And so it's kind of cool to feel like you're just looking at this new kind of modern, warmer climate Rhode Island, but still have somebody around to talk to about what the fish trawl was like all the way back when it started.
I think that is absolutely fantastic. And what an awesome thing to share, Joe. Thank you. So I guess everybody's really interested about crabs, Nina, since you had mentioned the different species that you catch. So Violet would like to know if you ever catch any hermit crabs in the net trawl.
Yeah, we do. We catch some hermit crabs, and those are actually a little tricky sometimes because they like to steal or use the shells of things like whelks, which we also catch. So sometimes you have to make sure that you're catching what you think or counting what you think you're counting, and make sure you check to see if it's a snail or a crab.
Yeah, so what they're showing here, it looks like, is a whelk, is a big, those are pretty big though, right? And when they think, I think when kids might be thinking of hermit crabs, they think of the little ones that we catch on the shore and you can hold in your hand. Are the hermit crabs that you guys pull up in the net, they obviously are much bigger?
Yeah, we catch some smaller ones, but I think we catch a lot more of the bigger ones that would, I think they're called like broad claw hermit crabs that we would see that would use a whelk shell or things like that.
Awesome. Thanks, Nina. So I think that, it looks like we have one more question before we start to wrap up. You mentioned squid. Actually, this is a good point. So are squid, are they something, because squid, if I understand correctly, is actually a fishery. It's a Rhode Island fishery. Is this something that you see trends in as well, shifts in squid numbers that you're pulling in the catch?
Yeah, so squid is kind of Rhodey pride for a species. Point Judith is actually the largest squid port in the United States.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Rhode Island lands something like 25 or 26 million pounds of squid a year.
Wow.
So everybody dig into some calamari. It's squid season right now. And so we catch two species in the bay, predominantly the longfin inshore squid, occasionally the shortfin elex squid, but mostly the longfin squid, and that's the target of most of that Rhode Island fishing. So squid are super interesting. We've definitely seen them increase in abundance over time. They kind of exploded in the mid-90s. We had a lot of these kind of mid-food chain species like squid and herring explode in the mid-90s, and it seems to be, based on some of our analyses, that when all those cold water, big predatory fish kind of declined in Rhode Island, but before all these warm water species arrived, there's kind of a happy zone in the middle for these species that are usually getting eaten. And so we saw a ton of squid in the 90s, but the overall pattern kind of long-term is a slow increase. And squid are also spending about 2.5 to 3 months longer each year in Rhode Island waters before migrating offshore.
Wow, fascinating. And then the data that you keep talking about where you're seeing all these different shifts in numbers, is that available to anybody to access?
It's available upon request. So because it is such a unique data set, and because it literally allows us to do research nobody else can in the world, we do keep it a little close. But if people are interested in using it for a class, or if they're interested in doing a research project on it that doesn't conflict with something a current student has going on, obviously we don't want to throw our own students under the bus, then we can make it available. And so there's a way to request the data through our website.
Okay, great. And I'm sure that website link has been shared either through Facebook or through YouTube, and is something that all of you can definitely check out further. But I think this is where we're going to wrap up. Before I say thank you and goodbye, I want to make sure I give you all some homework to think about. Hopefully you've got a new understanding or appreciation for Narragansett Bay, what makes it unique, this really special fish trawl or fish survey that's conducted out of the Graduate School of Oceanography, and that provides super valuable data and super special data. And so I want you to think about how you all might be able to protect or study the Bay yourself, or if you're not local to Rhode Island, maybe another coastal or estuarine in your region. So here we have something called the URI Watershed Watch Program. It's where it's citizen science. You can go out and you can sample a body of water that may be near you, whether it's a stream or a river, or you could go out to one of the beaches and monitor the water there. And you have protocols that you follow. So hopefully that you can check that out. There is a website for that. And there may be similar programs in your location as well, where you can become a watershed monitor. I know they do this inland as well, not just along the coast. And something else to keep in mind, beach cleanups. Those are going to be happening. They happen usually in the fall, but I believe they also occur in the spring. And that's something that you can do at any time. And it's an international effort to keep our coastlines clean. I want to thank Joe and Nina so much for offering their expertise and insight today. Joe and Nina, I'm going to throw one last question at you all. In one sentence, can you guys say what you loved or what you love about your work, about your research, about the survey? What do you love about it?
I love that it feels like I'm getting a chance to get out in the water and feel like I'm making a difference by adding to the data set that we've been collecting for the past 60 plus years.
And I love to use these data both to understand climate change and try to improve fisheries management to support our fishermen and our marine communities.
Awesome. And I love that you both share your knowledge and your enthusiasm for what you do with myself and then everybody else who was engaged today. So thank you so very much. I know that a bunch of different websites and other resources are being shared in the chat box on Facebook, and they might be also be included on YouTube. So definitely click through those and check those out, the different projects and other associated resources that we have. Make sure you keep following along with the URI, GSO, and ISC social media handles so you can stay tuned for more GSO Ocean Classroom events. I know we're hopefully planning something in conjunction with World Ocean Day, which is coming up in June, so stay tuned for those details. If there are other topics that you might be interested in learning about further, let us know. Write those into the chat box, or there is a feedback form through which you can offer further comments and, again, make those suggestions about what topics you might want to learn more about. Otherwise, thank you again so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you diving into these topics with us through our Ocean Classroom Live events. I hope you all continue to be well, be safe, and we'll chat again soon. Bye.